The Sega Game Gear is no doubt my favorite handheld console. Not only did it have a color screen, it also had a nice feel in the hand. And thanks to modern screen replacements, you also get something that you can see on pretty much any angle, as opposed to the original screen. But one thing that is missing is HD video output. Now, this has been done with McWill's original screen replacement, where he also offered VGA output, but as of yet, I'm yet to see something that offers HDMI video output. That is, until now. So what we have here is BennVenn's HD video kit. This is going to intercept some of the signals on the Game Gear and convert them into HDMI. This does require a slight bit of case modification. The HDMI connector is designed to fit at the bottom here, so we will have to cut out a tiny bit just to fit the HDMI connector. So the first thing we need to do, of course, is open up the Game Gear. And here's the insides of this Game Gear. Of course, it has been recapped. This is a must for any Game Gear. If you haven't already recapped your Game Gear, definitely do it now or get somebody to do it, because they will leak and it will eventually destroy your motherboard. The other thing you'll probably notice is this does have BennVenn's replacement screen. This is the one that I modded a bit over a year ago when that thing first became available, but you can perform the HD video mod with an original screen or any other replacement. Let's continue on by removing everything else. You may also notice that I wired a lot of these signals to where I could find them on the board. So I don't think this is the recommended installation for that screen, but that's what I did at the time because I just like to do things differently. It looks like this over here is a bodge that I've done, probably because there was a leaky cap that corroded some traces. So yes, change your caps. Now I will also mention this kit was sent to me for free by BennVenn, but I did also purchase some other stuff at the time. Either way, this video is technically a paid promotion. Right, so our main board is freed, and at this point I have no idea what to do next, so it's time to RTFM. Right, well, according to the manual, we're supposed to test this board first to make sure it actually works, so probably should do that first. So we need to apply power by the USB-C, and I might just steal this HDMI from the laptop. Right, and with the board powered and HDMI connected, I've got this hooked up to the plasma TV. This is a rare shot of the other side of the room that you don't normally see, so anytime you see me staring at this camera and it looks like I'm staring slightly off into the distance, that's because I'm actually staring at the screen behind it, which shows me the overhead view of the bench. Anyway, let's see if we switch inputs. Okay, yes, it looks to be working. So that's apparently what we should see. Carry on. Right, so next up we need to connect this board to this board using these included pin headers. It looks like there's a line under the pins that we need to solder to, so there's a few up here and there's a row down here, and I think the board sits that way. Now what I do see is this line sort of starts almost halfway between this pin and stops halfway between these two, so are we soldering this pin to this pin or this pin to this pin? What's the deal? And similar sort of story up here, the line is sort of halfway between that pin and halfway between these two. And this one is shifted all the way to the right. So I'm guessing all these lines are slightly shifted to the right. So I'm guessing it's those two pins, and then we'd skip those two, and then these three. So that line is actually part of that pin. So it's 1, 2, 3. And if it's all shifted right, then I guess it's that one to that one. And looking at the images that Ben has got on his website, it does look correct. And looking closely at the board, it looks like the unused pins aren't actually connected to anything. So it'd be safe to put all of them in. I guess you'd just be stuffing around soldering pins that you don't need to. I think I will just put the whole row in this part though. There's no point in skipping two. Right, so that's our pin headers just placed in the board. Obviously we've got a few spare. I'm just going to stick this other board on top just temporarily, just so I can make sure these pins are at least aligned properly. So I'm just going to sit it there like that. I'm only going to solder the bottom side first. All right, let's just tack a couple of these in. Looks pretty even. So the HDMI connector should be close to these pads here, and I think at the end we just need to sort of try and angle this like that. But first, let's finish soldering all the others. All right, that looks pretty good. So pushing down on the HDMI connector tilts the board, and then if we lift this side up a little bit, we can get a pretty decent angle on there. I think that's the idea. It's got one pin in place just to see. So yeah, I think if I sort of lift this up as much as it'll go without putting too much strain on this board, because yeah, it is pretty flimsy. I think something like that looks right. I'm just going to solder each end of these connectors first, and then I think maybe we should do a test fit before we go soldering everything else. Right, so I think this part is the HDMI output connector, and it looks like it sits over this post here, so I'm guessing that should sit down there. I'm pretty sure the HDMI connector should be flush with this rear case. I think this is like a resin print, so it is a lot stronger than a 3D print. It's also quite a tight fit. So yeah, I think that should sit pretty much flush with the rear case, and then we obviously need to cut a little bit out. But right now I just want to make sure this is all going to fit back together before I go soldering everything else. So this board sits around those posts. This is going to plug in here, but that way. And our little flat flex cable needs to be out of the way of everything else. Right, well, the case appears to close properly, so I think that's a good sign. So I might just disconnect this from here for now. Leave that in the case. Let's solder the rest of these pins. Right, and that should be our two boards connected. Now we need to make the connections from this to the Game Gear itself. And it looks like there's a couple of ways to do this. There is a little helper board which sits around the front here and basically solders to the old connection for the ribbon cable here to get our data and clock signals, all that kind of stuff. I don't have the little helper board, so I'm not going to be doing that. Maybe Ben just figured I wouldn't need it. That's fine. Obviously I've got the replacement screen here which probably uses all the same connections, so I could just tap off those, I guess. And of course, if you've got the original screen on there, these are not going to be accessible anyway, so you're going to need to find different points to solder them in. I'll try and leave as much info in the video description as I can for this thing. I think it's still fairly new, so instructions may evolve, change, whatever. Depending on which way you're putting this in, yeah, you might need to remove the board, you might not. I guess if you want to use the original connections for the screen at the front, you will have to take the board out to access them, or if you want to use that little helper board, you're also going to have to take the board out. But if you're using connections from the rear side of the board, then you probably don't need to remove this. Alright, so our little board should fit over the posts in the Game Gear here, and then we just need to solder up these connections over here. Not sure what the ones are from this side. It says 5, 6, 7, 8. Maybe Benn Venn is a S Club 7 fan? Is it S Club 7 that did that song? I don't know. Crap song anyway. Let's try and hook up all these data, ground, various connections. It looks like some of the silk screen is cut off from the board here, but it does show it on BennVenn's website which of these pads are what. So probably check there. This one up the top here is D3, and you can see that it's sort of been cut off at the edge of the board, so yeah, niggly little things. All right, we'll start with this pad in here, which is the clock signal. So I'm just going to pull this from the same spot as this board here because I don't really want to try and solder on the main board of the Game Gear because, yeah, it's too hard to get in there without melting all this other stuff that I've already put in. All right, and that is our rat's nest complete. Yes, it's not my finest work, I'll admit that, but it should do the job. Yeah, when I originally put this screen in, I used all these little points down here for like data connections and clock signals. So they were already kind of messy a little bit. And then wiring everything from the screen to this board, obviously, you know, pretty much doubled the amount of wires here. I didn't use the power from the screen board. I ran separate wires to this capacitor over here, just so we're not drawing too much power from this point here. Actually replace this wire as well. And one thing I am a little bit worried about is because these pin headers stick all the way through to this board down here, the other side of these is going to be pretty much rubbing on the main board of the Game Gear, which I don't really fancy. So you can see all these points here are pretty much going to rub on these traces down here. I might just put a little bit of tape over that. Just a bit of tape there, just so these pins don't rub through the solder mask and potentially short something there. The other pins actually hang over the edge of the main board, so don't have to worry about them. Alright, so according to the instructions, these little LEDs should illuminate if we've got all the connections correctly. Now you can't use the USB-C power anymore to power up this board because that'll actually try and power the Game Gear and might fry something. The instructions online do actually have a picture of a separate board powered by USB-C, so it is a bit, yeah, I don't like that picture. So I won't worry about connecting the soundboard. I'm just going to connect the rear power board and obviously put some batteries back in. Right, we have lights. Oh, we have one more light, two more lights. So 1, 2, 3, the fourth light is out, and then 5 and 6. According to the instructions, fourth light should be illuminated when both D0 and D1 signals are detected. Well, both those connections seem pretty solid here. Maybe it's because there's no cartridge. Okay, yes, I think you need to have a cartridge inserted and actually working, so double check that the cartridge is actually running, and then you should have all these 6 LEDs plus this one down here, whatever that does. Yes, if one of those isn't illuminated and you've got a cartridge in and confirm that it's running, then definitely go back and check your connections. All right, let's see if we can actually connect this and close it up. Yes, before I go closing it up, I need to cut a little hole for the HDMI. I might just use this as a guide. And that thing's in there quite tight now. I need to get it out. Just have to sort of lever it back off that post. Maybe. Here we go. Wow. Okay. So we need to cut out about that much. Right, I think that should be good enough to fit the HDMI connector. I'm not great with mods that involve cutting stuff. I guess this is fairly unobtrusive, but yeah, I much prefer something that's no cut. Hopefully we might be able to get something in the future that takes advantage of using this spot where the link port is for the HDMI connector instead. Think that'll be okay. In fact, let's just test that theory. Okay. That should work. Let's hook everything up and give it a try. Yes, by the way, this is an aftermarket soundboard made by Matthias, I think it is. Sorry if I've got that wrong. Yes, it is also available, I think, on BennVenn's website and possibly other places. Yeah, again, I haven't looked. He was kind enough to send me this for free, so I haven't got around to it yet, but thank you. Yes, I will actually have a proper look at Game Gear soundboards at some point. Okay, now I sort of go like this, plug that in there, being careful not to mess up the ribbon too much. And then I guess we kind of need to make sure this doesn't get stuck near the cartridge port connector. So kind of want to have it sit sort of under there somehow. Yeah, that's close. I don't like that. I think this needs to have a fairly decent angle on it. So sort of folded like that a little bit, and then maybe everything will fit. It's certainly a tight fit with all that with all that stuff in there, but it seems like the case should be okay once we throw some screws in it. It's definitely a tight fit with all that in there though. Right, I haven't put the screws in the corners, but it looks like everything has closed up okay, and I don't see that flat flex cable getting in the way of the cartridge port anywhere. In fact, I don't see it at all, so that's a good sign. This is actually an EverDrive in a salvaged case, so it does actually have one of the original, I think it's the original Game Gear EverDrives, which came with as just a PCB that you supplied your own case for. So I yeah, sacrificed whatever this thing is. I'm pretty sure I tried out that game, and well, 4-in-1 games, and it was pretty crap, so I stole its case. Alright, that still works. Let's plug in HDMI. Alright, I've just got the phone set up there, pointed at the TV, and we'll plug in HDMI if it'll fit. Or did I make that too tight? Possibly. No! It's just the tiniest bit too tight. I need to shave a tiny bit more off the bottom. Alright, I had to shave a tiny bit more plastic out to get the HDMI connector in, but it should now fit. It's pretty snug. The phone camera is pointed at the display, which I normally use, so with any luck when we power this on, we should get something on the TV. Well, I've got something on this. Got nothing on the TV. Okay, let's open it up again. Ah, so the plug going to this board wasn't all the way in. That's probably what'll do it. All right, take two. Could have just been that I didn't have that plugged in properly. Plug in HDMI. Phone camera is still rolling. Let's see if we get anything on the TV. It flashed. It's saying VGA. Oh, we have a white screen, but I also have a white screen on the Game Gear, so that could just be bad contact with the cartridge. There we go. All right. Oops. What happened there? All right, I'm getting some dropouts on the TV. And that wasn't happening when it was just running in the test mode or whatever it was before we connected everything to the Game Gear itself. So after a good amount of head scratching and trying different cables and different displays, none of which seemed to work reliably, I went back and checked BennVenn's website, and it does mention that if the display is unable to lock the Game Gear's native frame rate, you can press and hold switch S2 to disable frame locking. S2 is this little button down here, so that's what I tried. So again, powering it on, Nothing seems to work right, but pressing and holding S2 gives us a screen. Oh, the cartridge port must be a little bit dirty in this thing. I should have checked those LEDs. All right, LEDs are on. Now if we press and hold S2, there we go. I can't really show much more at the moment, but it is stable. As soon as I release S2, it drops out. So according to the website, we can just bridge the pins on the switch to force it to always stay on. So let's do that. Okay. That should have bridged those pins. We can just check it. So these two should be shorted now, which they are. Okay, so that switch is now permanently on. I don't know if something different can be done in the firmware to set that option without bridging those pins, but I guess it's not that bad. Right, let me reassemble this, hopefully for the last time. Okay, throw the battery covers back on. I am confident about this one. Right, Game Gear's working. This plugs in here. And this is actually where my camera decided to freeze. Look at that face. Oh shit, don't sneak up on me like that. Right, we have the Game Gear running. I've got it running into OBS through some HDMI goodness. So yeah, everything seems to work pretty well. The Game Gear games load and play just as you would expect. There is a little bit of lag in OBS, but that's certainly not down to the Game Gear or the mod itself. It's just OBS being OBS. I'm also using this big, massive box here, the Kramer Presentation Switcher. It's the model VP443. The reason I've got this out is because it can actually take HDMI video and add analog audio to that. So I now have the HDMI from the Game Gear plus the audio headphone output running into this box, which then runs out of this box through HDMI into the capture setup. So yeah, this all seems to work pretty well. And although I wouldn't recommend looking for a presentation switcher, something like this is kind of handy to have, you know, something that only does video output by HDMI and adding the audio into that for a full HDMI experience. So yeah, this is working quite well. I did notice a little oddity with Master System games. So if I just pause the game here, you'll notice that on the capture, every so often, the borders will flicker a little bit. This isn't actually happening on the Game Gear screen, so there is a slight issue with the HDMI output, but it only seems to affect Master System games, and every so often you just get a random flicker in the borders. I don't know if this is something that's going to be sorted out or can be sorted out in the firmware for the HDMI HD video mod, or if we're just stuck with it. But in saying that, it's a small price to pay to have what is essentially a HDMI Master System, assuming you've got a flash cart or a Master Gear converter thingy. So all in all, I am pretty impressed. You'll probably notice the frame rate on the capture isn't great either. That's just because I record everything in 25 frames per second. And this thing is outputting 640 by 480 at 60 frames a second. So frame rate's probably not good for what you're seeing, but it's perfectly fine for what I'm seeing. So after speaking with Ben, it turns out there is a little jumper on the board that can be bridged, and that will actually help with certain displays. So for example, the plasma here, I had to bridge switch 2 in order to get it to work properly. But I actually managed to remove the bridge off switch 2 and bridge the tiny little jumper near the HDMI port, and it still works with this plasma display. The good thing about that is it also removes the flickering that we saw from Sega Master System games. So I think by default Ben is going to have the jumper bridged and obviously the switch 2 still open. So that hopefully will fix up compatibility with a lot of displays. Certain ones still don't work. For example, the Kramer switching box, I still have to bridge switch 2 in order to get it to play nice with that. But at least for the other main displays that I've got, like my plasma here and the OLED out in the lounge room that I've always wanted to play Sega Game Gear games on, it works perfectly with just the little jumper bridge. So I think Benn is going to do that by default from now on. As I said before, this is a fairly new product, so no doubt updates will come. So best to check Benn's website for all that kind of thing. So with all that being said, I would definitely recommend this mod. I think it's a great way to get HD video from a Game Gear, and if you've got an EverDrive or something, you can get Sega Master System games straight to a modern display. Technically it's DVI because it doesn't include the audio or any licensing to go with it, but there's workarounds for the audio thing. So definitely I think this is a good mod if you're a fan of the Game Gear or the Master System. I have seen some other recent things like Game Gear consoleizers, which I'm not as much a fan of. I much prefer to have the Game Gear still work as a Game Gear. I think this also works really well as a simple dock. So imagine you're out, you're playing your Game Gear, you come home, you plug it in, you want to play it on the big screen, away you go. You can even hook up separate audio if you want. And continue playing. You could even turn down the screen brightness if your screen has that ability. So I think this is a great mod for the Game Gear, and if you're a fan of Game Gear or Master System games, I definitely look into this one. A massive thanks to everyone for watching, a huge thanks to the people that support the channel on Patreon, and I will be back in the next one with some other crazy mod probably. So thank you all for watching. Be sure to leave a comment, let me know what you think. Also check the comments for the pinned comments because I will post any updates there. Also check Benn's website for any further updates. Thank you all for watching. Bye. Ah, damn it. As always, a massive thanks to everyone for watching. A huge thanks for the Fuck. Fuck. Fuck it.